Hello, fellow Democrats. My name is Jenny Bach, California Democratic Party Secretary, here to welcome you to our panel on Stop AAPI Hate. Thank you so much to all of you for joining our space. It hasn't been an easy year. It's been tiring and it's been painful. Since the start of the pandemic, our country has seen a surge in hate crimes against the AAPI community, including assault, discrimination, racism, xenophobia, and the murders of our most vulnerable. I wish I can say that there's hope, but these senseless acts aren't new. The AAPI community has been threatened of our livelihoods, whole historically cultural neighborhoods on the brink of erasure, while hate crime reported incidents are on the steady rise. It's been painful having to receive racial slurs directed at me and my family growing up, and it's a scary feeling worrying that what happened in Georgia can happen to my family. All of this has been hard to understand and process at times. Asian American history in this country and state has been diverse and rich. The AAPI community has contributed to the farm worker movement in building a vast transportation system that's connected city to city, our architecture, food and culture, the arts, and so much more. But we've also endured a dark history that's often been left out of our classrooms and books, like the Chinese Exclusion Act, discrimination against our South Asian community post 9/11, how our Japanese community were held in internment camps, the murders of our community members, like that of Vincent Chin. Lately, it's felt like history has repeated itself, with the future looking bleak if we don't stand up against hate. We simply cannot accept being othered any longer. We simply can't bow down our heads and think that we'll get rewarded for good behavior. We can't let hate and fear narrate the story of our people any longer. The model minority myth is just that, a myth. The AAPI community belongs here, and we ask all of you, our community, our allies, to stand with us to break the cycle of historical oppression and racism. Stand with us against AAPI hate. Thank you.
Good evening, Democrats. I'm Melissa Ramoso, outgoing state chair for the California Democratic Party Asian Pacific Islander Caucus and mayor pro tem for the great little city of Artesia. It is the eve of Asian Pacific Heritage Month. I'd like to say Ramadan Kareem to everyone who celebrates. And today we're commemorating more than 40 years since the fall of Saigon, also known as Black April, which changed the lives of many Southeast Asian people and families. Before we get into the panel, I'd like to quickly introduce one of my favorites, California Democratic Party's incoming Vice President Betty Yee, Vice Chair Betty Yee, who would like to say a few words.
Thank you, Melissa, for the kind introduction and for your leadership in this California Democratic Party as our API caucus chair, and for moderating this evening's salon for stopping AAPI hate. I'm honored to kick off this salon, but frankly, our goal must not be to have these conversations become the norm, but instead move each of us and our API sisters and brothers, our aunties and uncles, our gongongs and pawpaws to a place where we do not have to live in fear, where we are safe, where we are respected, and where we are valued. I want to thank Stop AAPI Hate for its collaborative and transformative work to create visibility and support for what has been a virus for far too long afflicting the AAPI community, the virus of hate. I want to acknowledge the allyship of so many communities who have stood with the AAPI community, understanding that it requires solidarity to fight and conquer hate. I want to uplift the work of our elected leaders and our community leaders who have been consistent voices in this fight and have implemented programs to ensure the protection and safety of our elders and other vulnerable persons in our community, from volunteer shopping services and companion programs to bystander training programs and more. Yet when these community leaders themselves are the victims of senseless attacks, we know we must double up our efforts. Leaders like Carl Chan, Oakland Chinatown Chamber of Commerce president, an outspoken advocate who was attacked in downtown Oakland just yesterday afternoon, need our sustained support and our presence and our voices as advocates. Throughout the course of our history of our diverse AAPI communities, hate and discrimination have marked our journeys. What we are experiencing today is not new. What is new and hopeful is our collective power, political, economic, social, generational, personal, to fight hate and discrimination. I believe at the root of hate is ignorance, and myths like the AAPI's being the model minority fuel that ignorance. Our work near term must not only be about safeguarding and protecting our community members from violence and threat, it must be about staying silent no more. It must be about how we, the AAPI diaspora, define our lived experiences that is marked by struggle and many challenges to the human condition. We ought not settle for how others define us. Our collective stories and personal journeys define us. We are grateful to the celebrities and the athletes and writers who have helped to give voice to our stories, our authentic stories free of biases that are so important to creating the safe spaces we all need to connect, to listen, to speak out, to fight, and to heal. Lastly, the healing work we must do will challenge us to come to grips with how we view others. Yes, beginning with how we view and see each other within the AAPI community, but more importantly, how we regard those outside our community, checking and working through our internalized oppressions. It's difficult to be optimistic when our community faces harm and threat every day. Yet I am hopeful now more than ever that together and in solidarity and allyship with our diverse neighbors, we have the power not only to fight this virus of hate, but to heal from it as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Controller Yi. Always so inspirational to hear from you. Appreciate you so very much. So back to our panel. Welcome everyone to the Stop AAPI Hate panel discussion. Many of you have been watching, rallying, or even experienced attacks yourselves and have seen the AAPI community go through so much during this pandemic. When the Georgia attacks and murders occurred, it really impacted us. And there were subsequent violent attacks that even went unattended since across our entire nation. We're grateful to the California Democratic Party to recognize and create this safe space this evening so we can hear from a panel of spectacular women who are in the fight against hate in the AAPI community. In the interest of time, each panelist can self-introduce as we get to our questions. But this evening, we have Connie Chung Joe, CEO of Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Los Angeles. Stephanie Nguyen, Elk Grove Vice Mayor and Executive Director for Asian Resources, Inc. Catt Phan, Vice Chair of the Orange County Young Democrats in Orange County. And Manjusha Kulkarni, Executive Director for Asian Pacific Policy and Planning Council in Los Angeles, which is a founding organization of Stop AAPI Hate. Thank you all for being here this evening. So let's start off with the discussion by sharing how the rise in hate incidents against the AAPI community have personally impacted you, your family, and those closest to you. Let's start with Connie.
Hi, Melissa. Thank you so much for having me. I'm the CEO of Asian Americans Advancing Justice LA, the nation's largest legal services and civil rights organization serving the API community. For me personally, it's really been weighing me down. Just this past week, we got requests to help provide legal services to 3 different Asian families where somebody in the family had been murdered. This happened in Los Angeles, Indiana, and Texas. In the case of Los Angeles, the person who had been shot and killed was a resident of South Pasadena, where I live, and a parent at the same school as my 2 children. So it has become very personal, not to mention people like my own father-in-law, who is a Vietnam War veteran who has been called racial slurs because he is of Chinese descent. And what I can say is that for many Asian Americans, it has become a heavy emotional toll for us. I find myself just talking about it is making me emotional. And I think I've heard many people talk about challenges sleeping, anxiety. People have bouts of crying. And these aren't even the folks who've actually been even, hurled insults and attacked, which even more so for folks like that, there's been trauma. People experience conditions that are similar to PTSD. And we know people are scared. Seniors are not leaving their homes. It has been a really challenging time for us all. And I think when I think about what can be done right now is our community needs an outpouring of support from allies, of folks saying that we care what's happening to you. They look out for us with colleagues saying, I hope you're doing okay, and being understanding that this is a difficult time for all of us. And also an investment, especially by policymakers, to support Asian victims right now. With the 3 murders that I mentioned, in all 3 cases, it involved the husband in an immigrant family who was the primary breadwinner. And I can only imagine for the widows and the children who are surviving, who have survived, what it's going to be like to try to navigate a life and livelihood and counseling and legal services and everything else you need if you don't speak English well, if you don't have culturally specific services. And so that's why right now it's so important to invest in API, community-based organizations on the ground, working with the victims who have the trust of the community, because that's what the victims need right now. That's what our survivors need.
Thank you so much, Connie. Stephanie, or Vice Mayor?
Stephanie's fine. Thanks, Melissa. I am the Vice Mayor for the City of Elk Grove, but also the Executive Director for Asian Resources, a community-based organization based in Sacramento. While we do have offices in LA, we are an organization that started because of the fall of Saigon. And thank you, Melissa, for mentioning April 30th, because today is actually a very sad day. And as you said, today is also known as Black April. That is what we call it, because this is the time in which we lost many lives. The war ended. And so I want to take a moment and just honor those that serve and honor those lives that we lost during the war of the fall of Saigon and during the Vietnam War. It is because of them that I am here today. So my family came here 40 years ago. And it is so disheartening for me to hear that over 40 years ago, we have endured all of this anti-Asian violence. And yet today it means even more to me now, because after the murders of the women, we held a press conference here to talk about how that wasn't okay at our organization. And I have to tell you, we had so many anonymous phone calls, anonymous letters come in to share with us that they too have experienced it and that they're fearful to come forward. And I say that because that is my story. That is all of our stories, that we were fearful of coming forward and we never talked about it. Never. We just thought, you know what, this is okay, put your head down, turn the other way. What my mom would always say in Vietnamese is "Kệ", which is who cares, just, leave it alone, right? And I can't, and I've said now, no more. And what we're doing now is we're telling our community, no more, it stops now, and that we need to talk about this. So I appreciate these platforms that are happening all across the country, because we need to continue this. This isn't just something that we end after a couple of months, but this needs to continue to go on and on and on and on and on again. So one of the things we're continuing to do with our refugee and immigrant community is that we're sharing these types of platforms with them. We're letting them know that the leaders in the communities are coming forward, and that if they've endured these as well too, they understand your pain, and that it is now time for you to come out. It is now time for you to report it. So thank you for that platform, right? Thank you for giving that platform for our community to be able to report this, because if it wasn't for that platform, I don't know where we would report this, right? They're not going to go to the place. They're not going to go to the elected leaders, because we've seen that. And so now it's time for us to be able to bridge that gap. Now it's time for us to be able to say, come forward, talk about it, How can we help you? And we're here to get results. And that's what we're seeing that we're doing right now.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. You know, we're hearing fear from already the pandemic, and now fear from being attacked. That's just a lot to carry in the context of our families and our neighbors and friends. I'll shoot this question over actually to Manju. How has this impacted you and your work you're doing?
Thanks, Melissa, for your question and inviting me to be part of this esteemed panel. APCON, my organization, is a coalition of over 40 community-based organizations that together serve and represent the 1.5 million Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in Los Angeles County. And we began to see, what's going on across our country last February. And I will tell you that, seeing what's happened in Atlanta this year, in Indianapolis, and really even that first case that we dealt with a child in a middle school in Los Angeles, to see that he was physically attacked and verbally assaulted, really just for being Asian American, being accused of having COVID, before there was even a single confirmed case of the disease in Los Angeles County. I think that explains really how fierce the racism has been. And then sadly, we've seen it across our country and state. Stop AAPI Hate, an organization we co-founded with Chinese for Affirmative Action in San Francisco State, we've gotten almost 4,000 incident reports from across the country, 1,700 just here in California alone. And, if I can, I'll just share some of, what we've heard from folks. I mean, essentially 68% have gotten verbally attacked, 10 to 11% have been physically assaulted, and then almost the same number of civil rights violations. And sadly, and I think, seeing this amazing panel of women, knowing that, we've borne the brunt of this. AAPI women have experienced hate at almost 2.5 times the rate of men in our communities. And so, unfortunately, it just saddens me to know how widespread this is. And even though we have 4,000 incident reports, and actually we'll be releasing a report next week with, unfortunately, even higher numbers, it's just the tip of the iceberg. We know it's actually potentially much, much worse. And Pew Research Center has said that it's 3 in 10 individuals from our community, which translates to 8 million people. I mean, just imagine that 8 million of us have experienced it. And so, to Stephanie's point, it's so important that folks report it. And I hope people will feel that they can trust Stop AAPI Hate, because we are collecting data from across the country. The reporting form is in multiple languages, multiple Asian languages, and we're putting up some PI languages now, because we know it's impacting not only Chinese Americans, but Korean, Vietnamese, Filipino, even Pacific Islanders and South Asians. I know we look a little bit different than others in the community, but we too have experienced that hate.
Thank you so much, Manju. It's so important, the work that you do, and to have this database, because but collecting that data will help us get the resources and also share with the community and analyze what is happening to every different community in the API spectrum. So thank you so much, Manju. So Catt, I'll tweak the question to you. How has this impacted you and your family, and how can the California Democratic Party and everyone be allies to the AAPI community?
Yes, thank you, Melissa. And I'm just truly so moved by my fellow panelists here, and to be in this space at such, pivotal part of our history and also part of our present. And I want to just shout out to my Vietnamese community, especially today. Xin chào quý vị. I think it's more important than ever, even in a digital space, to be together. And for me personally, I'm actually sitting where I was when I told my mom about the Atlanta shootings. And it was dinner, and I was telling her that this had happened. And of course there was shock. And afterwards, her immediate reaction was, where can I take you where you will be safe? Like, why are we here if this is what you're going to have to deal with? And I'm emotional because I can only imagine what she's feeling, being a refugee, sacrificing her entire life for this concept of safety and longevity and sustainability. And for her to see in like public and horrific ways on how completely opposite her dream was from reality. I even asked her too, like, do you regret immigrating to America? Of course, hate crimes are not centric to America, but especially in this moment, it's hard not to feel bombarded just by our location alone. And she just pointed out, like, I can't let myself think like that. Like, I can't allow myself to regret sacrifice. And I think I carry that with me as a moment of resilience, truly. One, to honor. I think as a young person, I'm incredibly aware of the privileges I have, but also the very different kinds of trauma that comes from being the child of, people who I love, who have this horrific memory that I have only heard about in history books. And now to grow up, I grew up in 9/11, the recession, the insurrection, and now these hate crimes. And I'm, not even halfway through my entire lifespan yet. So for me, it makes me want to sustain, it makes me, in some sense, mature quicker. Like I think about what does this mean for future generations in a much more tangible way now, because truly the actions that we do today are 1,000% going to impact the generations to come. And what we say and who we are and what we do, especially as a party, I think that's going to be magnified. And I think as the Democratic Party and how, allies, more realistically co-conspirators, I think we've moved past that point. People have been talking and yelling and screaming, and for us to really understand that no, people aren't just speaking out all of a sudden. Like we've been here. Like we've been here since the 1800s. We've been here through internment. We've been here and we are still coming here, and you cannot make us feel like we don't belong. So I think as the party, we have to be a lot more diverse in how we reach to these communities. Let them speak. The community leaders, I understand how politics can be divisive, but in reality, it is a movement for change. And the quicker that we understand, not this gap, but this opportunity to join forces. And I think we can do that by stepping aside, providing resources to the organizers on the ground who I've said have been here for decades. That's going to be the best way. Resources, support, and just really accountability and leading from behind versus wanting to make sure that we win elections, because the movement and the work, it goes beyond 2-year cycles. It goes beyond 4-year cycles. It is a lifetime.
Thank you so much, Catt. When the Georgia attacks happened, I remember all the caucus chairs reaching out to me and looking for guidance, or asking, what can we do to help you and the community? Just making sure we get the right resources and just having people understand how we're feeling as a community, and then also explaining to others who aren't from the community. So thank you so much for sharing that. We spoke about immigrant and refugees. The immigrant and refugee stories are deeply woven into the AAPI history. So please, let's also discuss the work that you've all done to help build bridges of opportunity for AAPI immigrant and refugees communities, or the work that needs to be done to continue building these opportunities. Maybe Stephanie?
Yeah, I could take that. Thanks, Melissa. So as I mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of Asian Resources, and we started because of the fall of Saigon, when we had the influx, the 130,000 refugees that came here to the United States, and many of them landed here in Sacramento, California, and we had to find a way to get them to become acclimated to this new life, this new world. And so we provided for them were things like ESL classes, things like how to shop, where to go to shop, how to pay for items, how to use a stove, right? How to use the restroom here, all of the things that you and I think that they should know. But when you come from a new country and things are done differently, that's what needs to happen, is that giving them that opportunity to become acclimated here. Fast forward, there are many of them now, there are business owners, and there are business owners right here in our little town of Little Saigon. And what we need to do is continue to support that, continue to embrace that, and continue to provide them with support, especially right now. As it was mentioned earlier, not only are we dealing with the AAPI hate and the anti-Asian violence, but also the pandemic. We're being blamed for the pandemic. We were told, and the country listened as our leadership called it something that I won't even want to repeat because I don't want anybody to hear those words anymore. So I don't even call it those anymore. And so what we need to do is continue to let them know that we're there to support them. There needs to be more organizations that are there to support these small businesses so that they can get back up on their feet again and be part of society again and contribute to society so that their children can also be a part of this as well too.
Thank you,
Melissa, if I could jump into that as well, I want to say that, I think we need to recognize the richness of our Asian Pacific Islander community. We are more than 50 ethnicities who speak as many languages across this country. In California, at least 40. And we are a majority foreign-born community, which means that we are predominantly immigrant. With that diversity, there are additional challenges for our community. Language barriers become huge. Cultural barriers can sometimes play a role. Understanding the needs of our community is critically important. So at Advancing Justice LA, some of the things that we do to champion immigrants and refugees is, first, we have a citizenship program across this country working with other API partners to make sure that our community members get naturalized so that way they can vote. And then a step two to that is encouraging our community members to be civically engaged. We need our people out there voting and using their voice by going to the ballot box. We advocate for language access every step of the way, whether it is in voting rights, whether it is in social services. When it comes to policy work at the state level, which we do a lot of, language access becomes one of the most critical areas. I think things often get translated to Spanish first, but we know with the diversity of languages for our community and with the high level of immigrant population we have, we need much more linguistically accessible services. And then I will also say it's why disaggregated data is also so important for our community. The model minority myth obscures the true needs of our community. And in fact, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders have the largest disparity between the haves and the have-nots. When you talk about income, educational attainment, any of these socioeconomic factors, the fact is we are not a model minority with all successful doctors and lawyers. We have so many needs, and those needs are being obscured by this thought that we are a monolith, and that disaggregated data tells the different story. We need it now when we have law enforcement collecting information about hate crimes and hate incidents. We need it when it comes to schools, and we want them to do it because if we're looking at bullying and what's happening, don't we need to know who is being bullied and why? We need to know it in every single area of government and service. We need it to be disaggregated, because how can you provide services and tailor it to a community if you don't even know what language they speak or which community is being targeted? So those are some of the ways that I think we really need to push for more for our community.
If I could add to that, APCON by our very nature is a coalition organization. So we're so honored to have member organizations like Thai CDC that represent the Thai community, a South Asian Network for South Asian Americans, LTSC and Chinatown Service Center for Japanese and Chinese communities, and of course Advancing Justice LA to do some of that broader work. And I think for us, it's important right now in a time of COVID, we are actually leading an effort of 17 collaborative partners to do outreach, to ensure testing and now vaccine distribution. And I'm really pleased to say too that ARI is one of those coalition partners leading these efforts. And in addition to those issues, human trafficking, mental health, these are all areas that impact immigrant and refugee communities. And I'd be really remiss, Melissa, if I didn't mention to you how important it is for us to show solidarity and allyship with African American and Latinx communities, because there are also Black immigrants, and we know there are, of course, Latinx immigrant and refugee community. So I think a lot of our work is out, not only within the API space, but outside of it, because we know that together, I think we're going to achieve the policy prescriptions our communities need and have been strong advocates for. So, I want to just make sure that folks know that that's an area too that we've got to continue. Even as we this month celebrate APA Heritage Month, that we have to remember that all of this work has to be in coalition with our African American and Latinx sisters and brothers.
Well said, Manju. Thank you so much. And for our last question, and maybe if you could answer, the Governor Newsom has stood with the AAPI community, calling out the hate against the AAPI community. From your perspective, how will the recall campaign against Governor Gavin Newsom impact the AAPI community? You can most certainly speak from your personal perspective and not your organization too.
I can go, Melissa, if that's okay. Great. So we're talking about anti-Asian violence, AAPI hate, and we are all hearing that this has been going on for decades. For my family and my community, over 40 years. We now have a governor that is standing with us. He is there with us. He understands it. He's talking out against it, right? All the time. He appointed the first Black Secretary of the State. He appointed the first Latino state senator. He just appointed the first Asian American California Attorney General. He is building allies amongst all of us and bringing us all together, unifying us, something that we have not seen in a long time. For the first time, we were all speaking out about the anti-Asian violence that's happening. We are all talking about the stories. And I attribute a lot of that to the governor taking leadership and taking that, being that leader and encouraging us, but also standing with us as well too. When you have your leader that is doing that, you too want to be able to say, if he's talking out and he's with us, it encourages us to be able to do the same as well too. The recall on Governor Gavin Newsom is going to take us 10 steps back, if not even more than that, because I don't know if we'll continue to feel safe speaking about this. I don't know if we're going to continue to feel safe having these panels, right? I don't know if my community is going to feel safe even going out there and doing the things that they need to do every day, like go to work or go shopping. Right now is when all of the leaders are coming together and calling this out as what it is. And that's what we need, is a governor that can stand with us and saying that this is wrong and it needs to stop.
And then Melissa, I could also add on as well, just speaking on as the vice chair of the Orange County Young Democrats, it's definitely a very, crossroads to say the least on where we are. Orange County is home to Little Saigon, the largest diaspora of Vietnamese Americans. But at the same time, we have seen, misinformation, disinformation, just completely barrage our communities and other communities as well. And I would also, it needs to be said for folks who, aren't part of the community, maybe for them, they feel blindsided by this recall, but it's so important to understand the context of where this came from. I know for so many Vietnamese community members, their livelihoods are based in nail salons, small businesses, Philip Tha, which is, Asian Garden Mall, all these, beautiful cultural staples of the workforce. You can imagine how incredibly disorienting it is when they're getting, mixed messages on what is safe, what is not safe, opening, reopening. And for folks who, again, are not properly given outreach to, referring back to what Connie said of the API community is not a monolith. You can't just have 2 languages and call it a day. There's up to 42 different languages in this diaspora. So if you don't understand that, you will miss millions of people in your messaging. And what's important too is these folks who are losing their livelihoods, losing this, the family, re-traumatizing themselves. They see who is in charge of California, and it's, to them, it's a clear distinction of who to blame, who to put this pain into. And if anything, the recall has given us an opportunity to reclaim this narrative of who Governor Newsom really is, who the Democratic Party really is, and how they can stand with these small businesses, with these refugees. I think it's really important for Gavin Newsom, our governor, to highlight what the Vietnamese community, what the AAPI community is all about. We just had 33 deportations of Vietnamese refugees. They came here when they were young after the war and just incredibly ripped away from their families after repenting, after redemption. And I think being able to understand, like what my panelists have said, violence is not just physical. It's clear to see, a physical assault. It is so much more dangerous to see, the invisible assaults, mental, emotional, spiritual. And if we don't tap into that, if we don't, provide adequate COVID outreach, if we don't provide equitable vaccines, I know the data right now shows that the AAPI community is doing very, fairly well with our low cases and also with our vaccination rates, but community members on the ground are still finding folks hidden in these tech barriers and these language barriers who are unable to get vaccinated, who are still, discriminated at work, who are not getting their equitable pay. And for us to understand from the micro level into the grassroots level, that is what's going to be important. As someone who was part of the coordinated campaign in 2020, who's been doing this work in Little Saigon, who is talking to people who would never even say the word Democrat because it just has a visceral reaction to them. We need to have these hard conversations, and they're in our families, they're in our neighborhoods, and now it needs to be from the governor's office.
Yes, thank you so much, Catt. We have to definitely prepare ourselves for this recall, and we're looking forward to the California Democratic Party to provide us the right information, even in language, to help talk to our friends and family. It's so important. The other side can get really ugly. So we should brace ourselves and prepare to fight for our governor and our state. So thank you so much to this wonderful panel from the bottom of my heart. Always great to see wonderful, powerful women who speak their hearts and their minds and help our community. Thank you so much for being here. All right. So next, before we end, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, which is our incoming Secretary, Malahat Rafi. And following her is Sherry Yang, our CDP staff who created tonight's event. And thank you so much, CDP, for having us.
Good evening, sisters in the fight for equality, justice, and really bringing this to light. I want to thank you all for the work that you've done in the community and beyond. What I've learned in this process is how important representation really is and how important it is for us to go to the community rather than expect the community to come to us. Catt talked about Orange County, and she's absolutely right. We lost seats because of the misinformation, disinformation that was being peddled to the AAPI community. And the Democrats weren't in the same space that the Republicans were at. We were not on WeChat the way the Republicans were. We were not doing what they were, and we weren't able to stop them. So now we must really kind of bring the brain trust together and make sure that we're properly communicating and using the right channels and making sure we're there. As a refugee myself, as an immigrant myself, your stories resonate with me. I'm in that double world, but I came here when I was 5 years old. So my son is the very, very first American-born citizen in our family, and he's biracial. Just 3 weeks ago, right here in Orange County, as he and his dad, who's he's a 6'6", 350-pound Black man, were approached by what I can only describe as a white supremacist on a motorcycle around the corner from our house at a gas station, and told that Black people don't belong here. So the fight for equality for the Black community, the fight for equality for Latinx communities, for Middle Eastern communities, for AAPI communities is going to last forever. And in that fight, we have a lot of education to do. So I'm with you in this fight as your secretary-elect and soon to be secretary. I commit to you to amplify voices from within your community to make sure that you have the platform that you need, that whatever I can provide. And I appreciate the support that I've had over the years. I'm honored to be serving with Controller Betty Yee on this, and will be leaning on her quite a bit. And I look forward to working with all of you moving forward. Thank you for all that you do for our party and for the opportunity to speak.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sherry Yang. I'm the Communications Director for the California Democratic Party. I want to thank you, the amazing leaders who took their time to be here with us tonight and shared your stories. I know how difficult it can be to, especially in the API community and our culture, to be completely vulnerable in front of everyone. So I want to say thank you. But I'm so happy to introduce one of our final speakers for the night. Please welcome Assemblymember Evan Lowe.
Hi, I'm California Assemblymember Evan Lowe, representing Silicon Valley and currently serving as chair of the California LGBTQ Legislative Caucus, as well as vice chair of the California Asian Pacific Islander Legislative Caucus. I'm a proud fourth generation Californian and one of the nearly 6 million Asian Pacific Islanders lucky enough to call California our home. But like so many, this past year has left me with a mix of feelings that range from sadness to despair to anger and righteous outrage. Since the start of the pandemic, the Stop AAPI Hate Project has received nearly 4,000 reports of hate crimes and discrimination targeting the Asian Pacific Islander community. But what's most troubling is that many of these attacks have been on our women and those that are elders in our community. In fact, as I gathered with my 92-year young grandmother to celebrate the Lunar New Year, she told me that she was afraid, not from contracting the COVID virus, but that she was afraid of becoming a victim of a hate crime while simply going to the grocery store. These surges in hate crimes reached a terrifying moment on March 16th, when a gunman in Atlanta killed 8 people, including 6 women of Asian descent. We know that these attacks are rooted in racism, which was unfortunately amplified by the previous occupant of the White House. The former president stoked anti-Asian hate by using racist terms to describe the COVID virus. But the truth is, hate is a virus. It spreads between family members and friends who pass along their fears and insecurities. Those individuals then seek retribution that might be misguided in destructive methods, which is why it's so vital for us to respond by standing in solidarity and by saying, enough is enough. Right now, we are living in a moment for all Asian Pacific Islanders to rally together. This is our moment, not just as Asian Pacific Islanders, but for all Americans, and especially as Democrats, to rally together. It's not simply enough for us to disavow racism, xenophobia, and/or violence, but we have to speak out, go to rallies, share stories, write letters to the editor, share on social media. We need all to understand that many members in our community are suffering. And unfortunately, these attacks are nothing new. Anti-Asian laws and attacks in our country date back to more than a century in our history. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 prohibited Chinese laborers from even coming to the United States. In fact, in 1942, President Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, which forced Japanese Americans into internment camps. Then in 1965, President Johnson signed the HART Act, which was celebrated at the time for opening immigration to Asians based on merit. But this law also created what's known as the model minority myth. This term model minority suggests that Asians will always follow the law, will work hard and stay silent. This model minority myth has been weaponized against races and ethnicities by falsely suggesting that they are more prone to crime, less interested in education, and more dependent on welfare. But I'm here to reject the model minority myth and tell you loud and clear that as Asian Pacific Islanders, we will not stay silent. Over the last few months, I've attended rallies that have shown me that our community is standing strong, much in part thanks to each and every one of you for your solidarity. We've seen incredible displays of allyship, and this is the only way that we can end systemic racism and tackling the hate crimes targeting our Asian Pacific Islander community. As an elected official, recognizing that being seen as an Asian Pacific Islander isn't just about me as one individual, but it's also about those who have come before us. I am absolutely a product of the hard work of previous Asian Pacific Islander legislators like Norm Mineta and Congressmember Mike Honda. These leaders have paved the way for younger generations and the future generations to come to answer the call for public service. And it's because of these hardworking men and women who broke through the bamboo ceiling that we were able to stand up for each other and for our communities. But being seen as an Asian Pacific Islander elected official is just one thing. And on behalf of all of us, I want to thank you. I will not be the first, I will not be the last, but our democracy is fragile. And we here in California have seen how fear and misinformation can be weaponized. This is especially true in regard to our misguided recall effort. The pandemic has claimed the lives of more than 500,000 Americans and more than 60,000 Californians. Much of the loss of life can be directly attributed due to the lack of leadership under the former president. In contrast, Governor Newsom's decisive actions nearly a year ago saved countless lives and offered support to our heroic frontline healthcare workers. It's important to note that many of the people who support the recall are the same exact people who supported Donald Trump's failed presidency. These are the people who call for freedom, but ignore the basic fundamentals of science. Now, we find it interesting that so many people who supported the misguided recall effort were just as vocal in their support of the false election claims leading up to the attacks on the US Capitol. Their arguments were not made in good faith. Their attacks on our democracy are rooted in maintaining the status quo and lack of empathy for others. Here in California, the governor has made monumental efforts to advance equality for all people, including that of our own LGBTQ community. Governor Newsom has made the biggest commitment in ending homelessness in California history, prioritizing efforts to keep people off the streets and into secure housing. He's also been a champion for the Asian Pacific Islander community in the face of these attacks, with the nomination of Assemblymember Rob Bonta as Attorney General. A recall is not only misguided, but it also risks the progress we have made in California in recent years. Governor Newsom was the right person to lead us during this incredible and difficult year. He is the right person to lead us into better days ahead. Now, as we look forward to putting the pandemic behind us and ending the hateful attacks towards our Asian Pacific Islander community, I ask you to engage with your elected officials and with each other as fellow Democrats. History will judge us on how we respond in the months to come. Let us be relentless in the pursuit of progress and fundamental justice. Thank you all, fellow Democrats. Be strong.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that Assembly member. Up next, this person is a trailblazer for AAPI women. Till this day, she continues to be a leader in fighting for the AAPI community. And I'm so happy to introduce our final speaker, Congresswoman Judy Chu.
Hello, Democrats. I'm honored to be here at the California Democratic Party's 2021 virtual convention. I want to congratulate each one of you for your hard work this past year. You are the ones that worked tirelessly to elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and because of your persistence, we now have control of the House, the Senate, and the White House. Despite our victories, we still have a lot more work to do to turn this country around. But in the midst of all of this, I truly appreciate the fact that you have made it a priority to address the issue of increasing violence towards the AAPI community. Last month, our nation was shocked and horrified by the murder of 8 people in Georgia, including 6 Asian women. In response, I organized a congressional delegation to Atlanta to meet with the victims' families as well as with local AAPI community leaders. And we went there with a purpose: to follow the murderer's steps to show how deliberate he was in targeting 3 Asian-owned spas. Starting at the site of the first shooting named Young's Asian Massage, we then drove 27 miles, as the shooter did, until we arrived at 2 more Asian spas that were next to each other, where he continued his murderous spree. Local sheriffs had tried to diminish these crimes by saying the shooter had a sex addiction and a bad day, but he had plenty of other places to go to in those 27 miles. Instead, he chose 3 places where there would be no doubt that Asian women would be killed, and there is no doubt in my mind that these shootings were a hate crime. And I've written a letter to the Department of Justice urging them to investigate it as such. Nothing could be more deliberate and intentional. The shooter's actions shouted hate when he targeted these locations. He viewed the victims as nothing more than their race. But we know they were so much more. In fact, in Georgia, we met with the victims' families who, through their tears, told us the stories of their loved ones. These were hardworking mothers and grandmothers. Some were in their 50s, 60s, and as old as 74, who were simply trying to support their families. Xiao Jiatan was the owner of Young's Asian Massage and a mother who worked over 12 hours a day, 6 days a week to provide for her family. Her daughter Jamie spoke to us through tears about how unfair it was that her mother's life was cut short. Young Ayu was a mother and grandmother who loved to cook Korean food and sing karaoke, and who made sure her sons went to college. But the shootings could not be a surprise because anti-Asian violence has been on the rise since the start of the coronavirus pandemic over a year ago. Since the start of the pandemic, there have been over 3,800 reported anti-Asian hate crimes and incidents. These were incited by Donald Trump, who sought to shift blame and anger away from his own flawed response to the coronavirus. He used racial slurs like China virus, Wuhan virus, and Kung flu, fanning the flames of xenophobia. Over time, the attacks only got worse with increasingly violent assaults, some fatal, targeting older and more vulnerable Asian Americans. Earlier this year, Vicha Ratanapakdi, an 84-year-old Thai man in San Francisco, was killed in an unprovoked assault while on his morning walk. In New York, 61-year-old Noel Quintana's face was slashed from ear to ear with a box cutter in the subway, requiring 100 stitches. And in my own congressional district, Matthew Leung was beaten with his own cane at a bus stop in Rosemead, causing him to lose part of his finger. In fact, these anti-Asian hate crimes have become almost a daily tragedy, leaving many Asian Americans wondering, will I be next? That is why we in the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus have been taking action all year with press conferences, statements, and letters to the White House to protest Trump's terminology. But Trump doubled down on his racist rhetoric, only worsening the violence. However, today, the nation has woken up to this issue, and what a difference it's made. Most recently, immediately after the shooting in Georgia, we asked for and got a hearing in the House Judiciary Committee on anti-Asian hate, the first congressional hearing on this topic in 34 years. We called for a virtual National Day of Action and Healing on March 26 to stop AAPI hate. Millions of people participated, and there were 1.1 billion interactions online. This massive participation included the president, vice president, celebrities and athletes, as well as corporations and grassroots groups. The incredible number of tweets, rallies, speak outs, and vigils have sent such an important message, showing that we are not alone in this fight. And fortunately, we have received help from 2 very important partners, President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. Within his first week in office, President Biden issued a presidential memorandum to address anti-Asian hate that instructed the Department of Justice to meet with the AAPI community to find solutions for combating this crisis. And in fact, we've already met with them. And earlier this month, I and members of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus met directly with President Biden and Vice President Harris at the Oval Office in the White House to discuss urgent priorities. We talked about such issues as passing the American Jobs Plan, combating anti-Asian hate crimes, addressing COVID-19 disparities, fixing our broken immigration system, increasing AAPI appointments, and prioritizing data disaggregation and language access. And let me tell you, it felt good to finally have a president that actually knew what he was doing. And we are also working hard in Congress to stop hate crimes from a legislative standpoint. Our laws are clearly not suited to this moment. That is why we are pushing for Congress to pass the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act and the No Hate Act. These two bills will help provide more resources and support needed to track and respond to hate crimes and to keep our communities safe. And as we move through the next few months, it's critical to recognize that California's AAPI community is also facing additional threats. In fact, the very same people who've incited hate against the AAPI community across the nation are now funding a campaign to recall Governor Gavin Newsom. Let me be clear. Over the past 4 years, we had a president who completely abdicated his responsibility to keep Americans safe. When it came to the pandemic, Donald Trump ignored warnings, downplayed the severity of this crisis, and failed to prepare for months, allowing the coronavirus to spread rapidly and undetected. He lied to the people, claiming that the coronavirus was totally under control in the US, despite admitting he knew about the severity of the crisis in January 2020. Now, we've lost over 560,000 American lives over the past year. Governor Newsom stands in sharp contrast to our former president. Right away, he took action. And now California is winning the war against the pandemic. In fact, California is moving quicker than any other large state to vaccinate its residents with more than 10 million vaccinations already administered. California has actually distributed more vaccines than all but 5 countries. He's also providing direct relief to 6 million Californians with $600 cash payments, as well as more than $2.6 billion in relief to small businesses. And while former President Trump fanned the flames of xenophobia and instigated the rise of anti-Asian hate crimes across the country by calling the coronavirus Kung flu or Wuhan virus, Governor Newsom has taken steps to protect and defend our community by signing into law $1.4 million in funding to support the Stop AAPI Hate Reporting Center. Now that's leadership. And when it comes to AAPI representation and diversity, Governor Newsom makes sure his actions match his words. He believes in diversity because he knows how important it is to give people with different life experiences a seat at the table. In his administration, he appointed AAPIs at the highest levels, including Julie Su as California Labor Secretary and David Kim as California Transportation Secretary. And now look, our very own Julie Su has been nominated as Deputy Secretary of Labor for the entire country. Since the beginning of his term, the Republicans and right-wing extremists have been fixated on removing Governor Newsom, no matter the cost. But we know it's just their attempt to steal power. California deserves better. Now more than ever, we need to work together in solidarity to stop hate against the AAPI community and to stop the Republican recall. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. There are so many things we can do to take action to stop AAPI hate, and these leaders here today are working hard to stop hate crimes from the local to the federal level. The California Democratic Party will actually be holding a virtual celebration this month, or April, in May, I'm sorry, for the AAPI Heritage Month. So it's going to be on May 26th, 6 to 7 p.m. Check out our website. It'll be up on there. We'll also share it on our social media. So stand with the API community to stop hate and to stop the Republican recall by visiting stoptherepublicanrecall.com. Thank you, everyone, and have a good night.